So we're going to have a look at this 2017 Leaving Cert Ordinary Level Paper 1 question 8. So it's a functions and graphs question with a real world aspect to it. There's some calculus involved later on as well. So we've been given a function p of x is equal to 275x minus x squared minus 2000. We're also told in the question that x has to be less than or equal to 200. X is the number of kilometers of fiber optic cable this company can sell, and then P of X is the profit. So if we know an amount of kilometers that this company has sold, we can put it into the profit formula and figure out the profit. This company cannot make more than 200 kilometers of cable in any particular week, and so that's why X has to be a value that's less than 200. So the first question asks us to use the profit function to find out how much money the company loses if it doesn't sell any cable. Now, if a company doesn't sell any cable, that's 0 kilometers of cable, so x is equal to 0, and we're going to sub this value of x into the function, and we get a value of minus 2000. So if the company doesn't sell any cable, then this company loses 2,000 euros, and that's the first question. So 5 marks for the first question, which was basically just some substitution. The second part of the question is a little trickier. The second part of the question says that the company makes in a particular week 8,350 euros, and what we're looking for is the number of kilometers of cable. So we're looking for a value of x. We're not filling in a value of x into our profit formula. So the profit is 8350. That means P of x is 8350. So we set up an equation letting the function equal 8,350, and then we solve for x. When we do that, we can see that we can make a quadratic equation out of this. How do we make a quadratic equation? Well, we're first of all going to subtract 8350 from both sides, and then we want the quadratic equation to be in the correct format. So we're going to start with the minus x squared plus the 275x, and then when we subtract the 8350, we minus that with the 2000, and we get minus 10,350. So this is a quadratic equation, and before we start, it's always a good idea just to multiply across by minus 1 if the quadratic starts with a minus number, which it does in this case. So multiplying each term by minus 1, I get a quadratic equation of x squared minus 275x plus 10,350. There's two methods to solve a quadratic equation. The easiest and shortest, if we're able to do it, is by factorizing and then letting each bracket equal 0. The alternative method is, if we can't do that, we can use the minus b formula, the quadratic formula that's in the tables, and we'll have a look at that method in a couple of minutes. So factorizing this quadratic is very difficult because it's very hard to come up with numbers that multiply to give 10,350. A bit of trial and error on your calculator might find those two numbers that multiply to give that, but if we're not sure, we just go ahead and use the minus b formula. So after a bit of playing around, I figured out that 45 times 230 gives me 10,350. And again, you know, that's not a multiple or a multiplication sum that we're going to know just off by heart. And so it is important to know that we can always just go and use the minus b formula. So just to test that the factorization is right, x times x is x squared, minus 45 times minus 230 is plus 10,350, and the product of the inner terms is minus 45x, and the product of the outer terms is minus 230x, and the sum of those is minus 275x, the x term in our quadratic. So that's just a check that we do to make sure that our factorization is right. We're going to now let each bracket equal 0. So x minus 45 is equal to 0 and x minus 230 is equal to 0, meaning that x is 45 or x is 230. Now remember that we were told in the question that x has to be a value less than or equal to 200. This company can't make more than 200 kilometers of cable in the week, so the answer 230 is an invalid answer and we don't accept it. So if this company is to make a profit of 8,350, they're going to have to produce 45 kilometers of cable. Now 10 marks for that. Just running through the minus b formula just to show that how we would have done that and how most people probably did approach this question, given that the factorization was quite difficult. We write down the minus b formula, the quadratic formula from the maths tables, which says that x will be equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we need to just write down what the values A, B, and C are for this formula. So A is the coefficient of the x squared term, so that's the number beside the x squared, which in this case is 1. B is the coefficient of the x term, which in this case is minus 275. And then C is the term that's independent of x, that has no x in it, which is 10,350. So we're going to sub these values into the minus B formula. I just want to write 275 a little clearer. And we're going to sub these into the minus B formula. Tidy it up. A couple of places to be important. When you have a minus B term, you're going to have a minus by a minus at the front of your formula. That's going to obviously become a plus. And then the other place to be careful is that minus B, when you put it into the minus B squared part, that's going to become a plus number. Now, to ensure that that happens, you just want to make sure to put the minus 275 in a bracket. So I'm going to multiply this out and tidy it up. So I take a couple of lines just to simplify it. And I get 275 plus or minus 185 over 2. So there's two answers contained within this. The way we find the two of them is we split them up into the 275 plus 185 over 2 and the 275 minus 185 over 2. And then calculating these on our calculator, we get x is 230 and x is equal to 45. As we said before, x equals 230 is not a valid answer because x has to be less than or equal to 200. This company can't make more than 200 kilometers of cable, so we accept the answer x equals 45. And I would imagine that when this question was asked, most people would have gone and done the minus B formula like this. Okay, as mentioned, 10 marks for this. The next part of the question asks us to find the profit given various amounts of kilometers of cable sold. So they give us amounts from 50 all the way up to 100, going up in tens. Now the value for 70 they've already worked out, and oftentimes what they'll do is they'll calculate one of the answers in the table so that when we use our method to calculate the other ones, we can check if we were right with the value x equals 70. If we don't get 12,350, what we're doing must be incorrect. So how would we do this? Well, it's a good idea to fill out a table to show all your workings in case you make a mistake. So we're inputting all the values from x equals 50 to x equals 100 going up in tens. We're going to sub these one at a time into our profit function, and these are going to yield various profits for various amounts, kilometers of cable. So we're first going to enter 50, then we're going to enter 60, 70, 80, 90 and 100. And it's a good idea to enter all of these in your workings and then use the table mode in the calculator to just check your answers are right. So when I did it, I got that 50 kilometers of cable gave 9,250 of profit, 60 kilometers of cable gave 10,900 of profit, and so on to give 12,350, 13,600, 14,650 and 15,500. And these were the various profits we make when we enter in kilometers of cable amounts of 50 to 100. I'm going to place these into the table, and again, it is a good idea to show the workings and to check the answers using table mode into the calculator. If we make a mistake, then we will get all of the attempt marks that are going for the question, whereas if we just enter incorrect amounts here, we may have had just one small thing wrong with our formula when we're working them out, but if we didn't show any workings, those will all be incorrect answers and we won't get any attempt marks for this question. It's also a good idea just to pair up the points with the input, the kilometers value, and the output, the profit value, so that we can place these on a graph, which is the next question coming up. So 10 marks for finding all of the points, and then we'll get a further 5 marks for placing them on the graph. So placing them on the graph, we have 50, 9,250, we have 60, 10,900, 70, 12,350, 80, 13,600, 90, 14,650, and then 100 kilometers of cable will give us a profit of 15,500. Now make sure to join the points freehand. This is a quadratic curve, and so it's not straight lines between the dots, it's curved in nature. And the other thing we want to just check is we would have assumed that a minus x squared graph was n-shaped. The reason this isn't n-shaped is that we just haven't enough x value to enter in. If we kept entering in x values going up in 10 or going up in any amount really, we'd see that this curve begins to come back down over time. So it is an n-shaped curve, and it's just that we're only looking at a very small section of the curve. The other thing to notice on the graph is that we have values from 16,000 down to 9,000 on the left hand side, and obviously we can have profits all the way down to 0. And similarly on the x-axis we have cable amounts from 100 all the way down to 50, but we could produce cable amounts also all the way down to 0. And these squiggly lines just represent that these numbers do go all the way back to 0, but there would just be too much to fill on our graph. The reason being, if we were to scale this graph in such a way that we went down to 0 in the profit and went down to 0 in the kilometers, our graph would all be concentrated up on the very top right hand corner of the page, and we just have all this wasted space here. And so they just make us do a section of the graph from 50 to 100 kilometers, which is profit amounts from 9,000 to 16,000. So just to kind of save space, I guess, on the page. The next part of the question asks us to read from the graph. So they say, what are the lower and upper range of sales, so kilometers of cable? So we're looking for values along the x-axis here, in order to make a profit of between 10,000, which is here, and 14,000 of profit. So what do we do in a question like this? Well, we go to 10,000 and we read off from the graph the number of cables that would need to be sold to make 10,000. And so I have a value of 54.4 kilometers of cable. There'll be a little flexibility in this answer, so anywhere 53, 54, 55, all of those values should be acceptable. For 14,000 euros profit, we would have to produce 83.6 kilometers of cable, and again a flexible amount would be allowed here, so between 82, 83, 84, let's say, kilometers of cable would roughly yield a profit of 14,000. So the answer to this question is a lower range of 54.4 kilometers of cable to make the 10,000 profit, and an upper range of 83.6 kilometers of cable to make the 14,000 euros profit. The D part of the question is a calculus question. So it says use calculus. Remember that calculus for ordinary level maths means we will differentiate the function. So differentiation is involved here. We're going to take the profit function, which is p of x is equal to 275x minus x squared minus 2000. And they want us to find the number of kilometers of cable. So we're looking for a value of x when the profit is increasing at a rate of 105. So when the profit is increasing, that's another way of saying that the rate of change of the profit is 105. So how do we find a rate of change? Well, we differentiate the function using the power rule. 275x becomes 275, minus x squared becomes minus 2x, and then constants, remember, minus 2000, and they become 0 when you differentiate them. So we've differentiated the profit function with relation to x. This means that we've found the rate of change of the profit. Now, we have been told that this rate of change is 105. So we're going to let this rate of change equal 105 and solve for x. So essentially what we're doing is we're trying to find out what amount of cable sold, what x value, would give a rate of change of 105. And so this is a simple linear equation. We are going to bring the x's to one side and the numbers to the other side. So I'm going to add a 2x to both sides to have the 2x on the right hand side, and subtract a 105 from both sides to give me 275 minus 105 is 170. If 2x is equal to 170, x is equal to 170 divided by 2, which is 85. So when we sell 85 kilometers of cable, the profit is changing at that particular moment in time by 105 euros per kilometer of cable sold. So this final part of this question gives us 10 marks. So a question that involved obviously functions and graphs. We had calculus to look at the rate of change, and we also had to solve a quadratic equation during the question as well. So lots of great parts for revision there, not only in functions and graphs, but in differentiation and in algebra as well.